Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of Holy Hell. I cannot believe the new year has already come and gone and it is 2023. So I know I'm behind the ball on a lot of things, but first off, I hope everyone had a great new year. As for myself and Carrie, it was fairly uneventful because we were homesick with the crud. But lucky me, I'm just now recovering from that because it turned into walking pneumonia. Now, before I get started, I would just like to say I am absolutely thrilled that 2022 is over because that year totally sucked sick ass. Like, to start with, the year began with me having COVID. Then, about a month later, I was hospitalized because I had a severe stomach infection. Then, the place that I was working for ended up closing, which that really sucked because the people who I worked with were absolutely wonderful people. And as the year progressed, my dumbass decided to try a tanning booth for the first time, and after I broiled myself alive for 10 minutes, I couldn't move for the next 7 days. Then, all of a sudden, before you know it, the holidays were here. Then New Year's Eve was here, and New Year's Eve brought the crud, which of course turned into the walking pneumonia that I just spoke of. So yeah, 2022, if you're watching this, you can suck my... So, now that everyone is aware of how much of a dumpster fire 2022 had been for me and why there were so many delays with everything, I would just like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for the support that they gave me because their kind words, their positive energies, their get well wishes, their prayers, all of that truly made a big difference for how I felt emotionally, and I honestly wish I could hug you for that, but of course, we're not in person, so spirit hugs. Anywho, now that we've been caught up to speed, this weekend I'm reviewing the anthology Hark, the Herald Angels Scream, which was composed by Christopher Golden. And out of the books that I read for December, this was actually the only one that felt like it was a love letter for those who were craving Christmas-themed horror stories. And upon reading this, I also learned a valuable lesson, which is not only should you not judge a book by its cover, but you also shouldn't judge a book by its title. Because even though the title of this work sounds B-rated and cheesy, there wasn't anything in this collection that was cheesy whatsoever, and every single story was solid. By the way, I would like to note that I buddy read this with my good online friend Hanny, and as always, we had a lot of really fun discussions about the themes and the characters, but ultimately, we couldn't stop talking about how serious of a book this was, and how it just truly felt like Christmas Terra. And even though she did finish reading long before myself, I finished reading this on Christmas night, which that added into the experience being more enjoyable and authentic for myself. But I would just like to say thank you to Hanny for buddy reading this with me because I really enjoyed our discussions. And if you're watching, I hope you enjoy this review. So without further ado, let's see how everything that's Christmas isn't always merry and bright. Hark, the Herald Angels Scream, edited by Christopher Golden, is a collection of 18 chilling tales by authors like Scott Smith, Sarah Lotz, Jeff Strand, Josh Mailerman, and Angela Slater. Which, among the diverse horrors collected here, we have stories where nativity figures come to life, a robotic dog gets hacked, an angel of death, a cult leader becoming reunited with his followers, a song that is so depressing it causes a mass suicide, and much more. Which, primarily, the focus of this book is horror stories. However, that doesn't stop some of the tales from falling into the subcategories of dark fantasy and dark comedy. Hark, the Herald Angels Scream, edited by Christopher Golden, was published in 2018 by Blumhouse Books. Throughout Golden's career, he has served as editor and co-editor for 14 anthologies. His work has been nominated for the British Fantasy Award, the Eisner Award, and multiple Shirley Jackson Awards. Previously, Golden has been nominated 10 times in 8 different categories for the Bram Stoker Awards, where he won twice. One win was for the book Cut, Horror Writer's Own Horror Film, which was published in 1992. The second win was for his novel Ararat, which was published in 2017. In 2015, he founded the popular Merrimack Valley Halloween Book Festival. Fun facts! I would like to take this opportunity to shine some light on some of my favorite authors in this book. Although Sarah Lotz has contributed to the horror genre with titles like The Three and Day 4, she has also written suspense, romance, and romantic comedies. Under the pseudonym S.L. Gray, she has released horror books such as The Apartment and The Ward. And under the pseudonym Lily Hearn, she has co-written a zombie series with her daughter, Savannah Lotz. Jeff Strand is the author of over 50 novels and short works. Among his stories that blend a mix of horror and humor, his novels Blister, A Bad Day for Voodoo, and Wolf Hunt have won the Bram Stoker Award. Updates can be found on Strand through his blog, Gleefully Macabre. Josh Malerman is best known for his novel Bird Box, which led to the successful Netflix adaptation starring Sandra Bullock. During the COVID pandemic, he founded the production company To Spin a Black Yarn with his manager Ryan Lewis. Their first film was called We Need to Do Something. He is also a singer-songwriter for the rock group The High Strung. Angela Slater has won multiple awards for her fiction. In 2010, she won the Ditmar Award for the short story The Piece of Ice in Miss Windermere's Heart. That same year, she won the Aurealis Award for Best Collection with her book The Girl with No Hands and Other Tales. And again in 2010, she won Best Fantasy Short Story for The February Dragon, which was co-written with L.L. Hannett. In 2012, she won the British Fantasy Award for Best Short Fiction for The Coffin Maker's Daughter. Now that we have that covered, it's time to move on to the spoiler segment, which, if you haven't read this book before, I'm about to reveal some things that could ruin the experience for you. So if you would like to click away, all you have to do is scroll down to the comments and you'll see that I have a comment pinned at the top with the timestamp in it. Once you click on that timestamp, it will direct you away from the spoilers and bring you to the thoughts section. Now, you only have 17 seconds to do this. So, ready, set, go! Since everyone's had the opportunity to click away, I would like to talk about 3 of my favorite stories. First up is Not Just for Christmas by Sarah Lotz. Now, this tale is about a guy named Jake who had been kicked out of his house by his wife Myra because he had been a total bastard. However, since it's Christmas, she allows him back inside so he can gift their children what's known as a gen pet, which this is a genetically engineered robotic dog. And because of the popularity behind the gen pet, this has caused pet owners to kick their loyal dogs to the curb and replace them with this robotic toy, simply because it's more entertaining and convenient. But although their gen pet Teddy has started to win Jake back inside their house, this is when Jake decides he's going to upgrade Teddy so he can speak English. And unfortunately, after this happens, of course, Teddy gets hacked. And this is when Teddy starts spouting out nothing but commercials and inquiring about Jake viewing teenage porn. So after Jake sinks a lot of money into Teddy so he can get fixed, he goes into debt even more than he already has. And lo and behold, Teddy gets hacked again. But this time, Teddy is cussing nonstop. And since Myra doesn't want this around the kids, especially since Jake has no means to get it fixed, she hands the foul-mouthed little thing over to Jake and tells him to go. Well, eventually, Jake gets sick of Teddy, and he decides that he's going to ride into the woods and leave Teddy in the middle of nowhere. However, in the process of doing this, he wrecks his bike, and before he can stand up, he discovers that he's been surrounded by a pack of dogs that have grown starved and feral, which it's revealed that these dogs had been abandoned by their owners because these owners simply wanted to replace them with the gin pet. I really enjoyed this story because it presented a few things that I didn't expect. Like, with Teddy, I thought he was just going to be a homicidal robotic dog, but instead he just gets hacked. And because of this, it presented a comedic element to the story that I really didn't think was going to be there. And the cherry on the cake, in my opinion, is the brutal ending because I did not know this is where that story was going, and I was happy to see an asshole like Jake get his comeuppance. Also, even though the people in this story were divided between those who loved the gin pet versus those who hated the gin pet because they felt that real animals needed love more, a very malevolent side of me was really happy to see the consumerist junkies of this story lose out on their money because, in my opinion, unless you have a pet allergy, then yeah, you should adopt or rescue or what have you. But just keep in mind, whenever you make a fur baby a part of your family, that fur baby needs love and care year-round, not just for Christmas. My second favorite story is Tenants by Josh Malerman, which this is a fairly simple tale as it focuses on an annual Christmas party among friends, where a guy named Adam decides to bring a guest named Michael. Eventually, it's revealed that Michael had been a part of a cult that was big enough to fill up the entire state of Michigan. And because of what he had done, he had ended up serving 4 years in prison, where he was recently released like 10 days ago. Then, as the tension starts building more and more, we learn that Michael had been sentenced because of what he had done to one of the cult members, because their main tenet was, if you decide to leave this cult, even if it's against your will, you will be punished. So, as we're trying to wrap our brains around everything that's going down about Michael, it's noted that we can hear some carolers in the distance. And eventually the carolers make it to the house where Michael is, where one of the party members opens up the front door to reveal 8 women singing Away in a Manger. But it's at this point that everyone realizes these women don't appear wholesome or festive. Instead, they actually look like Manson family members, and they're really singing to Michael. This story was really unsettling because the ending presented 2 possibilities, and neither one of those possibilities were really good. Regardless, it is without a doubt that these 8 women were cult members and they were going from home to home in hopes of finding Michael, which this leads to 2 different outcomes. One, now that they found Michael, are they going to kill him because their main tenet was, if you leave the cult, even against your will, you have to be punished. So that was one side. But then the more I thought about it, I'm like, okay, well, these women were singing to Michael like he was the second coming of Christ. And if that's the case, perhaps what we're seeing here is the reuniting of cult members, which is pretty terrifying. Also, even though this story isn't full of guts and gore and it remains very simple throughout, I think this is a great example of how less is more can be pure nightmare fuel. My third favorite story is Honor Thy Mother by Angela Slater, which this is about a widow who has grown well into her senior years, And even though she is planning a big Christmas for her children and grandchildren, her children are conspiring against her to throw her into a nursing home so they can sell her house and take all of her money. But what her family doesn't know is she is actually the angel of death, and her divinity wasn't passed down to her children. So while she's backed into this corner, she decides it's finally time to give God a sacrifice. Similar to Not Just for Christmas, I felt like this was really an important story because unfortunately, I've actually seen in real life where people have put their parent or parents in a nursing home when in actuality, that parent or parents are doing fine on their own. But their primary reason for doing this is so they can sell their parents' home, drain their accounts, then stick them in a home where they can rot. And I was so very happy to see that the little vultures in this story did not get what they wanted. Now, I did, of course, feel sorry for the grandchildren because, like, they were way too young to comprehend what was going on, so I kind of felt like they were innocent. But as far as one of her sons is concerned, he kind of teeters on that line of being the good son, but at the same time, he never stands up for his mother, so yeah, glad he got what he did. Aside from that, I was really surprised that the mother of this story wasn't a witch, because the setting of this took place in Salem, and the whole witch idea was very heavy-handed to start with. So when it was revealed she was actually the angel of death, I was really satisfied because I hadn't seen that done before. Now, even though these three stories were my top three favorite, of course, I had a lot of other stories in this book that I absolutely loved, so I'm going to use this next segment as an opportunity to speak about another one of my favorites. I would like to take this time to bitch about that conceited bastard in the story Good Deeds by Jeff Strand. Now, the short and skinny of this tale regards a guy who loves himself so much he may as well just choke the chicken while looking into the mirror. And if you don't believe me, check this shit out. So, old douchebag here is standing in line at a store and he's just waiting for his turn. Well, ahead of him is this poor kid who's explaining to the cashier that he doesn't have enough money to buy his dying mother new shoes. So, what do you think happens next? Old douchebag steps up and says, "Hey kid, if you find your mother some affordable shoes, I'll buy them for her." Well, you know what? That's a pretty good deed. I have nothing to complain about there. I mean, there's no reason to peacock, right? No, because this asshat runs around like a chicken with his damn head cut off, telling everybody about the good deed that he did, and he feels like he should honor himself more by writing a song about himself where everyone can praise him for the good deed that he did. However, when the song gets released, it ends up being the most depressing shit that anyone has ever heard, and it causes a mass suicide, which this completely confuses him because he feels like everyone should be happy because of what he did, and they should praise him and kiss his ass and all of that good stuff. And even when he receives a backlash for this, he ends up blaming the poor kid who he bought the shoes for. Y'all, I know this story is an exaggeration, but that song, The Christmas Shoes, it is depressing as hell. Like, if you've never heard it before, seriously, it makes you want to jump off a damn cliff. And I'm surprised that when it was released, it didn't cause a gloomy Sunday effect, because it totally had the potential to do so. Anywho, let this story be a moral. If you are going to do a good deed, simply do that deed, shut up, and move along. Otherwise, you come off looking like a damn tool. Hark, the Herald Angels Scream was exactly what I needed for this past holiday season. And because of how much I enjoyed this book, I tend to think there's a few stories I'm going to revisit as a yearly tradition, which that's saying a lot because I normally don't do that. But out of the 18 stories presented here, I was really surprised to see that there weren't any bad stories. And I was just really taken back by that because this is an extremely diverse collection. And when you're met with such a mixed bag of treats, there's normally at least one or two stories that are stinkers. Now, with that said, of course, there were some stories in this that were simply okay. But just because they were simply okay does not mean they were bad stories. It just means that they didn't pique my interest as much as the other tales. Even though I do have a top 10 favorite list of stories from this book, I'm going to limit myself to only listing off the top 5 best, which among those I would include Christmas in Barcelona by Scott Smith, Not Just for Christmas by Sarah Lotz, Tenants by Josh Mailerman, Good Deeds by Jeff Strand, and Honor Thy Mother by Angela Slater. As I previously noted, this book is very diverse, and because of that, it offers up a lot of food for thought while commenting on our current time. And out of all of the themes that I encountered in this book, the ones that stood out to me the most regarded poor parenting, greedy families, irresponsible pet owners, capitalism, humility, and even cult mentality. As far as poor parenting is concerned, I think this subject was its strongest in stories like As Fresh as the Fallen Snow by Seanan McGuire and Christmas in Barcelona by Scott Smith. For example, in The Tale by McGuire, we're presented with a set of neglectful parents who wine and dine themselves while everyone thinks they're the perfect family. But at the same time, their poor children have to constantly skate on thin ice for fear of what will be done to them if they step out of line. Then, to our surprise, the author introduces this fairy tale twist that's whimsical for the children but devastating for the parents. Opposing that, Scott Smith is an author who I've enjoyed for quite some time because he creates characters who make poor decisions, even though these characters aren't actually awful people. And this is something that gets translated into his story Christmas in Barcelona, as it focuses on a couple who has gone out of country with their newborn that has never traveled. Now, even though these parents have nerves of steel when it comes down to a screaming baby, unfortunately, they don't have the good common sense to make correct decisions for themselves, much less their newborn. And because of that, it results in a really gruesome ending that might not be enjoyed by some parents. Which, after reading these two stories, I couldn't help but think they stood as cautionary tales that warned parents of misfortune coming their way if they don't take care of their children. Trailing on to that subject is the topic of greedy families. For example, the story Honor Thy Mother by Angela Slater focuses on a subject that I've unfortunately seen happen before in reality, where a family has placed their elderly parent in a nursing home, even though that elderly parent can still do well on their own. Now, the reason why they do this is so that family can drain that parent's bank account, sell their home, sell their property, and have a field day while that elderly parent rots away in a facility. And in this story, we are presented a fantasy side of what would happen if it were in that parent's power. But of course, in reality, that's not the situation. And I don't think that this story stands as a cautionary tale. Instead, I think its purpose is to bring awareness to this subject. Next up, Not Just for Christmas brings into play the subjects of irresponsible pet owners and capitalism, as this story shows how easily the general public can jump on the trend train of new technology, which, of course, as we all know, new technology is never cheap. But more importantly, the author takes this opportunity to bring awareness to people who buy pets as Christmas presents. Then after the newness wears off, those pets are tossed to the side of the road. Which isn't far-fetched because due to the area I live in, we constantly have strays. As a matter of fact, at one time, my mother had collected 9 dogs over the matter of 3 years, and all of these dogs had come up as strays after the holidays. So, for people who purchase a pet only to later abandon that pet, I would just like to say, you're an asshole. Then, with the story Good Deeds, we have the subject of humility that comes into play, which this is seen because a guy starts peacocking about a good deed that he did rather than remain humble. And because of him acting this way, he finds himself in a scenario where he only has himself to blame. And in my opinion, the moral of this story urges you should want to help other people and you should encourage others to be kind and generous. But if you do this, don't run around stroking your ego because you're just going to come off as an individual who's doing these good things because you want recognition. Which, to be honest, if the only reason why you're helping people is because you want a pat on the back, you're helping for the wrong reasons. Also, we're faced with the subject of cult mentality in the story Tenets, which this tale does a superb job of bringing multiple subjects into perspective. For starters, it asks exactly how open-minded and accepting a person truly is when they're faced with an unusual circumstance. Then, without going overboard, it shows us the unsettling politics of being in a cult. And before the story's over, it tends to ask the reader, do you believe in rehabilitation? Out of all of the stories in this collection, those were the subjects that stood out to me the most. Aside from that, it goes without saying that I thoroughly enjoyed the character development throughout this book, especially in the stories where the characters felt complex and I really didn't know what to think about them. So those were a lot of fun. But overall, this collection didn't gross me out. However, there were a few stories that did creep me out, and there was one story that actually did scare me. Hark, the Herald Angels Scream, edited by Christopher Golden, is perhaps the most solid and original Christmas horror anthology I have ever read. And my only one regret in having read this is knowing that there isn't a sequel because I am craving more stories like this. So when next Christmas comes around, unless by the grace of God a sequel comes out, I'm just going to have to revisit some of these stories. So when Christmas rolls around this next year, if you are looking for a collection of horror Christmas stories that are bound to entertain you and keep you chilled beside the fireplace, then I do highly recommend Hark, the Herald Angels Scream. Now that it's time to close out, I would like to thank these amazing people for contributing to my Patreon account. As you can tell, some of the names listed here are creators, so be sure to check out their work. And if you would like to contribute to my Patreon account, I have a link available in the description section of this episode. Also, if you would like to follow me on social media, links to my Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram are all available in the description section of this episode. And if you have not subscribed to this channel, be sure to subscribe and click that notifications bell because I have more videos coming in the near future. So until we see each other again, I hope you're doing well and sweet nightmares.